My word. A panel game devised by Tony Shrine and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
And we go straight into the first round, which is about words, and this week about Latinisms. That's about words or phrases in Latin which have been accepted into the English language. For 2 marks, what's the meaning of these? Beginning with Denis Norden. Denis, ad hoc. Ad hoc.
Well, on the theory that ad nauseam is a commercial for seasick pills, ad hoc would be a commercial for German wine. No. When you say we shall do this on an ad hoc basis, it's generally accepted to mean that we won't set up any permanent arrangement for dealing with the problem, but we shall take such steps as are necessary as and when the problem manifests itself.
Fair enough, Denis. It's for this special purpose, and if you have an ad hoc committee, which I hope we won't have, it's one arranged with a single specific item on the agenda. 2 marks to Denis. Dilys Powell, a priori.
Well, it means from what has gone before.
Yes. And you use it generally when, Dilys? This is not necessary. You've got your marks.
I never use it. You're judging from what has gone before.
Yes, that's right. From cause to effect, from a general principle to its consequences, and a priori reasoning means you're arguing from the pre-existing knowledge that you have, or even perhaps from your own prejudices. 2 marks. Frank Muir, prima facie.
Mm-hmm. Prima, how much?
Facie it is, but it's spelled F-A-C-I-E.
That's a relief. I didn't take Latin at school. I had pink eye at the time. I think it means first face, and it's a legal term, isn't
yes.
it? Prima facie. It's when a two-faced. It's the face a two-faced witness assumes in the box when everybody's looking at him.
I'm not marking on that one.
No, I know it. Of course. It means that if the police burst into a locked room and the butler is standing there with a smoking revolver and his lordship is lying there with a bullet in his heart, and he just has time to point to the butler and say, he did it. The police have a prima facie case for treating the butler as a suspect.
I can't beat that, or 2 marks at once. And now, Anne Scott James, yours is quid pro quo.
I think it really means that the pound has lost all its value.
Not going any
It really means a sort of a watch for a witch. In other words,
that's
it's
right.
a sort of you give a knock as good as you get.
You
yes,
scratch
right.
my back, I'll scratch yours.
That's right. It is a something for something rather than a something for nothing. And originally, apparently, it was a medical term. It was the blunder made by an Elizabethan doctor putting one thing into his prescription when he meant another, and the patient was usually dead. But it has become a something for something, a return, a consideration or compensation.
Those careless herbalists.
2 marks. But before we go on to the next round, here are the quotations you've been given for the last round, and Denis, yours is, and it's in ancient French, Honi soit qui mal y pense, I won't spell it, and yours, Frank, silent upon a peak in Darien. Well, now, round 2 is an odd man out round. For 2 marks, I want members of the teams to identify the word that in its meaning, nature, or relevance doesn't conform to the others in the group of words that I shall name. Dennis Norden.
Is this a writing down type round?
I don't think you need in this one, Dennis.
Right.
Just see what you think.
Saving.
But yours is lately, greatly, ornately, stately, and sedately.
Greatly. Oh, wait a minute. Stately.
Why?
Because all the others are... Because stately is an adjective.
Yes, and the others...
And the others qualify the verb, and a verb is a doing word.
My God, you were well brought up, Dennis. The others are adverbs.
Frank may not have learnt any Latin, but you've certainly learnt some
your
grammar.
Yeah. 2 marks. Dilys Powell. Turnhill, Longbourn, Longshaw, Hanbridge, Bursley, and Knype. Knype.
Knype.
Yep.
I've never heard of any of them.
You have.
Some of them are places.
They're all places.
Bursley is a place.
Some fictional and some fact.
Oh, well, Bursley is Arnold Bennett.
Yes, that's right.
Bursley's Arnold Bennett.
It's about a Bennett. There is a nominal connection, but not a connection of authorship.
Longbourn.
That's right. And that would be where?
Pride and Prejudice.
Doesn't matter. Yes.
Pride and Prejudice. By Jane Austen.
That's what I wanted. Turnhill, Longshaw, Hanbridge, Bursley, and Knype are the transliterations which Arnold Bennett, in the novels about the 5 towns, that is in Staffordshire, used for Tunstall, Longton, Hanley, Burslem, and Stoke-on-Trent. Longbourn is where the Bennets lived in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, and 2 marks. Now, Frank Muir, yours is very different. And please forgive me if my pronunciation isn't all that good, but it starts Felucca, Polacca.
Hang on. F-E-L-U-C-C-A.
That's right. And then Polacca, rather the same.
P-O-L-A-C-C-A.
And then Xebec, X-E-B-E-C. Yes. And then Quinquereme, Q-U-I-N-Q-U-E-R-E-M-E, and Drumbler, D-R-U-M-B-L-E-R. I want to know the odd man out of that.
Quinquereme is a boat, and Felucca is a boat.
Yes, that's
so
far so good.
Xebec is a boat.
Yes, you can go on like that if you like.
Drumbler sounds like one of those flat-bottom things which are pushed around in canals or northeastern rivers.
It was a lot faster than that, I think.
Well, never mind. No. Polacca is near the Russian border. It's a boat used for ferrying caviar across the Black Sea. They're all boats.
They're all boats, quite right.
Fine.
Now what is...
Hang on. What? Oh, Lord. So they're all boats. So
yes.
What next?
Well, they have to move. They have to move somehow.
Well, one of them...
I think if you
the odd man out is either sail or oars.
That's right. Absolutely right.
Fine. 2 marks.
Yep.
Next question.
Well, yes, just about. The Quinquereme is the only one of these 5 types of vessel which was normally, because I don't even know whether Quinquereme ever had a sail, but normally was rowed by oars. 2 marks. And Scott James, it's your turn. Yours is, I don't think you need to write this down. Snout, pistol, flute, quince, and starveling.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's easy.
Quince, flute, and the starveling. Well, most of them were the rustics in A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yes.
But Pistol was not.
And where was he?
He is the odd man out, and he appears in Henry V.
Yep, Pistol was an ancient, so Shakespeare says, which I think means the bearer of an ensign, and he was a ribald character in Henry V and also in Henry IV Part 2, I think, Anne. I remember right.
He was frequently loaded.
That's right, frequently loaded. 2 marks. And now a round of some elegant eloquence, culled from the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations. 2 marks again. And all I want is the name of the poet who wrote these. Denis Norden. Like some full-breasted swan that, fluting a wild carol ere her death, ruffles her pure cold plume and takes the flood with swarthy webs.
I know that. Is that then slowly answered Arthur from the barge?
Absolutely right. Yeah.
I always like that. If you make it auntie all through that poem, it comes out very well. You do it all through the poem. It's Tennyson.
Yes.
The Passing of Arthur.
Absolutely right. Tennyson, Passing of Arthur from the Idylls of the King. It's when Arthur goes away with those sort of funny women to the Vale of Avalon. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, and lucent syrups tinct with cinnamon, manna and dates in argosy transferr'd, from fez and spicy dainties every one, from silken Samarkand to cedar'd Lebanon.
Swinburne.
No, but tubercular.
Tubercular. Oh, now, quiet. Now, let's run through the Oxford Treasury. Keats.
Yes. Give me the poem, because I did help you rather a lot. He's taking tutti frutti to his sleeping lover, beloved.
Oh, I know.
She knows.
Yes.
She knows. Do you know?
Help her.
Yes, come on.
Cuban
Help
psyche.
us.
No.
No, it's not. You're
Not the Eve of
sleeping.
St. Agnes.
1.5. It's the Eve of St. Agnes.
I thought
You said it.
I did say it. I thought I got it from the other side of the house. I thought,
Still
no.
said it.
All right, we revert from 1.5 marks to 2. They're slightly dragged out. 2 marks it is. And now, Frank Muir, your turn. But when so sad thou canst not sadder, cry, and upon thy so sore loss shall shine the traffic of Jacob's ladder pitched between Heaven and Charing Cross.
Yes, a curious late 19th century
Yes.
religious poet.
That's right.
Called Francis Thompson.
Yep, comes from the kingdom of God, and that's good enough. Anne Scott James, your turn. Curates long dust will come and go on lissom, clerical, printless toe, and off between the boughs is seen the sly shade of a rural dean.
Oh, this is a modernish poet,
Yes?
and that it is Rupert Brooke.
Remember the poem? It's very well known.
The old vicarage at Grantchester.
Absolutely right. Rupert Brooke, the old vicarage at Grantchester, which he's alleged to have written in Berlin and got fed up there, and said, God, I will pack and take a train and get me to England once again. 2 marks. Well, now we come to the last round, and to Denis and Frank's quotations, and the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Denis, your quotation is Honnête soit qui mal y pense, which is normally translated, evil be to him who evil thinks.
Don't talk to me about the permissive society. This present generation, they don't know when they're well off. When I was 16, the only instruction a young bloke ever got was save it for your marriage. And although I was by then old enough to know what the word marriage meant, I still hadn't a clue what it was. The only carnal contact I'd had with any portion of the female body was in the bumps days. And even then, my partner was so much taller and heavier than I was, her very first bump propelled me straight through the door of the jail. Now, I don't think that moral standards were actually any higher in those days. There was just a limit to the number of things you could do in the back row of the Gaumont. Because that is where it all had to happen, if it happened, for those lucky enough to have it happen. Because none of the girls that I knew would even allow me to steer them into those seats. You see, the young females of my acquaintance, they had this theory that even to be seen sitting in that row was enough to besmirch your reputation, in the same way that today we have something called the $6 billion woman. So in those days there was something known as the 1 and 9 girl. So there was I, just past 16, going on 17, with not even a hint of any action in sight, till I made this deal with Spud Bernstein. Now, let me tell you about Spud. His position was that because of his heavy losses in a cigarette card game called Flixie the Furtherest, he was into me for no less than 2 sets of famous radio stars and 48 swaps of Butterflies of the World. And because of that, he put a proposition to me. If I agreed to cancel those gambling debts, he would talk to his 2 girl cousins and persuade one of them to sit beside me in that Gaumont back row. Well, talk about making you an offer you couldn't refuse. Even today I wouldn't turn it down. But that is why, on the following Saturday evening, there I was, back rowing it with the girl cousin whose name was Annie. Not much to look at, but definitely possessing what our geometry master used to call then curvilinear properties. And at 16, what else mattered? So the mighty Wurlitzer descended, the lights go dim, the film comes on, and I start movement 1, the traditional snaking of the arm over the back of the shoulder. Whack! Annie's handbag hits me right across the nose. None of that, she says. I said, but it's the back row. She makes no never mind. I'm only here to help Spud. Well, at least half a dozen times I tried again, but each time the same result. Whack! Smack on the hooter. Every time. Well, seeing the Gaumont always had a change of programme on the Sunday, as soon as I got back home, I phoned Spud and ordered him to line up the second girl cousin pronto for the next day. Now, her name was Molly, and to save you any suspense, let me tell you straight away, she was definitely a goer. No trouble at all. Except for one thing. She was a breather. Do you know what I mean? There are some people whose breathing always seems to come out 3 times as audible as anybody else's. With Molly, it may have been adenoids, or it may just have been hereditary. Be that as it may, and willing as Molly was, my first snaking of the arm movement, and she started. The chap in front turned around and said, "Do you mind?" He said, we're trying to listen to the big picture. And that's how it went on. When I put my hand on her knee, her response so resembled an organ bellows, we were both thrown out the cinema for drowning the soundtrack. So much then for Annie and Molly. One of them addicted to whacking a person across the bridge of the nose with her handbag, and the other responsible for the only time I've ever been ejected from a place of public entertainment. That is why on the Monday morning, when Spud gave me the well-known man-to-man wink and asked, "Any luck?" my dignified answer was, "Evil be to him who evil thinks." Because, as you know, if you put that phrase back into the original ancient French, it becomes Annie's wacky, Molly pants.
Well, I don't know about you, I think that's a rather sad story. But we go on to Frank now, and if you remember, Frank's quotation was, "Silent upon a peak in Darien."
It's to do with a chap I know quite well called Cortez. It was only a few days ago. He was pictured at London Airport leaving for Africa to shoot tigers, which is a terrible thing to happen to any lad. I mean, particularly as there aren't any tigers in Africa. And also he was carried on, had to be carried onto the plane because he'd ruptured himself in the departure lounge. He had a suitcase in either hand, and they were shouting out times, and he was trying to actuate his digital watch with the heel of his right foot. But this is typical of poor Cortes, because he was accident-prone right from birth, and he was, for a time, he worked as weeding the herbs on the floral clock on the esplanade at Margate. He was a kind of timekeeper, I suppose. And he used to go by train from Margate to Ramsgate. And one day he was going back on the last train and he missed it. And he decided to walk. He hadn't actually missed it, but he'd forgot to adjust his watch because double-breasted summertime had changed. So he decided to walk along the track. And he was in that very deep cutting in between Broadstairs and Ramsgate when he found that he hadn't missed the train. Nor did the train miss him. He was sensible enough to accelerate and break into a gallop to minimise the impact when it took him between the shoulder blades. But take him he did. And the doctors, in the hospital said, why don't you climb up the embankment? But, with his logical mind, he said, well, what chance would I have had, if I couldn't run faster than it on the straight? What chance would I have had uphill? While he was in hospital, he had this stroke of luck because there was a girl who came round in the East Kent Hospital and did good works. And she was the Honourable Angela Brisket. And she was one of those sort of rather tubby girls with no ankles and a rather braying laugh. But they became very fond of each other, and she used to bring him little presents, a pheasant's beak to clean his ears, little kindly things. And they sort of fell in love, and she invited him to spend the weekend at her house, this marvellous Georgian house near Canterbury, with her widowed mother, who was Lady Brisket. And the one great thing in her life was that she was a direct descendant from Fanny Braun, who was Keats' girlfriend, you remember. And the bedroom that she took this girl's boyfriend up to, the spare bedroom, was most beautifully done, sumptuously. All the walls were painted by Rex Whistler with scenes of Keats sitting there with a notebook contemplating a nightingale and his house in Hampstead and so forth. And poor old Cortes, he went to bed rather late, and he'd been nervously drinking water all the evening. And about 4 a.m, nature called with a call that could not be denied. So he rose from his bed, and it was pitch dark, and he didn't know where the light was, let alone where the door was. And he sort of fumbled around and found a kind of desk, and in doing so knocked over a vase. But then he worked his way round these painted walls until he found the door, which was quite shrewd of him. And then he went, and that was fine, and came back. And he woke up at 6 a.m. with the nightingales singing, and saw to his horror that right across these priceless Rex Whistler murals were black hand marks. And he looked on the desk, and he hadn't knocked over a vase, he'd knocked over a bottle of ink. And these murals were completely ruined. So that was that. So he quietly packed his bag and left the house. But then fortune struck. An aunt of his died and left him a lot of money. She was in an aircraft, a jumbo, and it sort of pointed its nose down to make a landing. And it was a long trip, and she couldn't sleep sitting upright, so she laid down in the aisle between 2 seats. And she got run over by a rogue duty-free trolley. And he inherited a lot of money, so he immediately wrote to Lady Brisket and said, I will commission David Hockney to redo your walls. Please, may I come and see you again? Please, will you give me another chance? So Lady Brisket said, right, yes, I will. So he turned up at this beautiful house just outside Canterbury and was shown by the butler into the small drawing room. And there on the seat, and he was very tired, having walked most of the way from Canterbury Station, was a lovely little sort of furry cushion on one of the seats. So he plumped himself down on that. And he suddenly had a curious sensation, almost as though there was an earth tremor. The chair seemed to be moving slightly under him, and there was a kind of whiffling noise. But then the sort of whiffling noise gradually stopped, and all movement stopped, and all beneath him was silent and still. And the door opened, and Lady Brisket came in and said, Mr. Courtiers, hello, have you seen my little Pekingese? I call him Endymion, you know, because we are descended from people associated with Keats. And have you by any chance seen him? And that is why Courtiers is now in Africa trying to search lions. And we leave the story with him. Poor Courtiers, silent upon a peak, Endymion.
Took us rather a long way, and by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Muir wins the story, but over the contest as a whole, it is a draw.
Taking part in My Word were Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore, and the programme was produced by Tony Shrine. My Word. A panel game devised by Tony Shrine and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
And we go straight into the first round, which is about words, and this week about words used in a special sense by artists in oils or watercolour. For 2 marks, what, to an artist, is the meaning of these words? Frank Muir, a Kit Kat.
Kit Kat is early 18th century, or possibly just slightly into the late 17th century. And it was, Kit Kat was a Whig political club named after the chap who started it. His name was Christopher Catt, who was a pastry cook. And for some curious reason, the members' portraits were painted in oils. And because the idea was to get a lot of them onto the wall, pictures were huge in those days. The artist, I think it might have been Nella, painted small, rather like photographic head and shoulders. And these are called Kit Kats, and you can see them in the National Portrait Gallery.
That's so complete. I think that's 2.5 marks out of 2. On to Anne Scott James. Your word is bloom, B-L-O-O-M, just like Ulysses.
Well, my husband paints.
Yes.
Not in oils, but in watercolours.
Understatement of the series.
And the thing he mostly scatters around is ink blots and bad language. But I assume that a bloom, which I've never heard of, is something like the bloom on a grape.
Yes.
And gives, I think you apply it with a sort of greenhouse spray, or primitive form of greenhouse spray. But anyhow, it would leave a sort of delicate, veiled, suggestive surface.
But do you want it or don't you, Anne?
You don't? Frank's shaking his head. I would have thought it was something that an impressionist might well go for. But let us just say it's a sort of mould if you've left your picture too long before actually finishing it.
Well, that's good enough, 2 marks. It's a bluish mist. It comes up sometimes onto the surface of a varnished painting, normally an oil painting. And I'm told if you have a silk handkerchief handy, you can polish it off and the picture goes back as it was. 2 marks. Denis Norden, a scumble, S-C-U-M-B-L-E, or the verb, if you like, to scumble.
It sounds like when you've finished an oil painting, you step back to admire it and you lean your hand into the palette. And you sort of scumble to find a paint. There's a sort of tumble and scramble to find a paint rag to...
Lean the other way, Dennis. Not away from the picture, towards it.
You're not going to help me, Jack. I think you can have it in house painting. Is it an effect you can achieve in house painting as well?
It's a thin veil of usually semi-opaque paint. It's used to cut down the sharpness of contrast, to carry the lighted area of a picture into the area of half shadow, and you can do it by lightly rubbing the paint surface. That's called scumbling. Dilys Powell, bravura.
What,
in painting terms.
concerned only with art? I mean, bravura normally means a slight tendency to show off.
Yes.
Which indeed is a tendency of very many artists.
And the kind of painting that...
Hello, artists.
the kind of painting that it would produce...
Actually, kind of baroque artist? Baroque painting? No?
I'm going to do. 2 marks. It is... A style of painting characterized by spirited or lively brushwork, as Dilys says, slightly show off. In music, it's spirit or dash in execution, or a particular air which is frightfully difficult with much too rapid passages. That's called bravura 2. 2 marks. Well, before we go on to the next round, here are your quotations for the last round. And Frank Muir, yours is, to travel hopefully is better than to arrive. And Dennis, yours is, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Now round 2. This is called something in common, and 2 marks again. What do the words and phrases in these groups have in common? Frank Muir, Vienna, Rui Lopez, modern Benoni, B-E-N-O-N-I, and Blumenfeld, counter. All got something in common.
It sounds like one of those Lady of Easy Virtue's diaries as to where certain encounters had taken place. Vienna, Rui Lopez, modern Benoni, and Blumenfeld's counter.
Yep.
She was a shop girl. Interior evidence.
Now, the diary would be... there was a very famous chap called Fisher who might have had these entered into his diary.
Chess player?
Yes.
Oh, God, I know nothing about chess at all. But they're to do with chess.
Yes, they are.
And they're the words used to describe a chess player's clothing. Vienna is a kind of coffee-coloured blouse, where Rui Lopez is a kind of bolero jacket in case the draft comes through. Modern Benoni is a kind of baroque trousers. And Blumenfeld's counter is where you can buy the whole lot cheap.
Well, if you stick to the game, which end of the game might you use these words?
Which end of the game?
Doing the moves.
Are they moves?
Try the moves.
They're moves,
Yeah.
Jack.
Yes, they are.
What we call moves.
I don't think you're going to get much further. I'm going to give 1 out of 2. They're all names.
Thank you.
They're opening gambits at the game of chess. And a gambit is you offer to sacrifice a piece for the sake of some advantage you may get as a result. And these are alternative versions. You have to learn absolutely by heart, hundreds of them, if you're ever going to be a chess master. 1 out of 2.
I'm not. I don't believe in exercise.
Anne Scott James, here's your set. Alchemist, Archer's Dart, Clifton Nonpareil, and Feathered Footman.
Well, all I can say to that. Anything to do with boxing?
Nope. It couldn't be more unlike boxing.
Couldn't be more unlike boxing.
Tell me what they say when they read out the greyhound winners.
Yes, it's all right. It's very much more feathery than boxers.
Oh, butterflies.
Yes, these aren't quite butterflies. What are the other
They're
kinds?
moths. Listen, I can now tell you all about them. The alchemist is the one that comes and flutters around the lamp and keeps you awake. The archer's dart's the one that touches your body, gets between you and your nightdress. The Clifton Nonpareil is the one that gets under the pillow, and the feathered footman wakes your husband up so that you're all awake half the night.
Before I get any more angry letters from lepidopterists, I'm going to give you 1.5. It will help towards your conclusion. They are all the common English names for particular varieties of moth. Now it's Denis Norden's turn. A pygmy pouter, an oriental frill, a Birmingham roller, and a crested mucky.
That's a cross-section of the fans who hang around the stage door at pop concerts. And if the crested mucky only had the figure of the pygmy pouter. Pigeons, they're pigeons. Pouter, yes, they're pigeons.
They're all varieties of pigeon. All right, 2 marks. Dilys, sanguine, choleric, melancholic, and phlegmatic.
Sanguine, choleric,
melancholic, and phlegmatic.
It's a humorous question.
Yes, it is. They're the kind of moods and I can't think of the word which people used when...
the liquids of the body.
Yeah, are they? Good gracious.
Humours.
He says they're the liquids of the body.
That's right. And the humours is the right thing. They were sometimes called complexions or humours of the animal system generally, including human beings, and one or more characterised, so the philosophers thought, the nature and personality of all living creatures, and the sort of warm and confident ones, that was blood, sanguine, the passionate ones was bile, the gloomy ones was black bile or melancholy, and the really cold and sluggish and rather nasty ones were phlegmatic. 2 marks. Well, now, this round is a round of unlikely connections. 2 marks again. I want to know what is the hidden or unexpected connection between the following. Frank Muir, Richard Carvel, C-A-R-V-E-L, and Savrola, S-A-V-R-O-L-A, Savrola.
They sound like late Victorian or Edwardian novels.
Yes, so absolutely.
3 deckers.
Dead right as to period. One was written in 1904, I think.
Is it a monkish piece?
No, but it's...
No, right, not a monkish piece.
You could fight it on the beaches.
You can fight it on the beaches? It's about oil slicks. Pollution.
No, not in 1904. We didn't have it then.
It's Haven in the Seventh, that character.
Oh, it's not Baron Culver. It's not...
No, I gave you a clue as to the author.
Churchill?
Yes.
Well, unlikely though it sounds, they're by Winston Churchill, Jack.
They both are.
And
they both are, but it isn't the same Churchill.
It's by the other one. Yes. This is the chap in America who wrote under the name of Winston Churchill.
That's right, it was his name too. I don't know what to give you, 1.5. A lot of pushing and shoving then. Winston Churchill was an American novelist born in 1871, and he wrote Richard Carvel and also Coniston and The Inside of the Cup. Winston Churchill, having written one novel only, Savrola, in 1904, he then put Winston S. Churchill, which he always used after that, when he was signing his books, as it were. And he did that because of the confusion between him and the American Winston Churchill.
And you would expect it to be the other way around.
Yes,
because
that's
that middle initial, that middle...
Anyway, 1.5. Anne Scott James, Flit On, Charing Angel, and Florence Nightingale.
Flit On, Cheering Angel, Florence Nightingale.
Flit On.
Well, angel's obviously the connecting word, isn't it?
I think Dennis is on his way, though.
I'm just working it out.
Yes, that's right.
There's the H. Yeah, it's all right. It's an anagram. I couldn't find the H, but I think it's an anagram. I haven't had time to...
Absolutely right.
Because flit on, that's a phrase that either sounds like it's an anagram or the thing the other way around. You know, what do they call them? Palindrome.
Palindrome. No, it's an anagram.
It isn't a palindrome.
Flit On, Charing Angel is an anagram, if you work it out, for Florence Nightingale. Quite right, 2 marks. Denis Norden now.
Now, if that had been in a crossword where there were money prizes, I wouldn't have gotten it.
But now it's Denis Norden's turn again. An ice cream sundae, spelt with an E and not a Y at the end, and the Puritan movement in America.
Now, I can recommend you a very good book called The Ice Cream Book, which is very good to read during the winter. And it's got it's illustrated in all kind of ice cream colours as well. And it tells you everything you want to know about ice cream. In fact, you get rather sick in the middle of it, you know. And it tells you why Ice Cream Sundae was invented, which I'm frantically trying to recall. And it was because ice cream was forbidden to be sold on Sunday in America. Yes. So they put fruit with it and said this isn't ice cream.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I think it was originally, in certain of the states, prohibition on the sale of ice cream with soda. I suppose soda was supposed to be a rather wicked drink or something. And so they sold it with syrup, or with fruit. And they called it an ice cream sundae. First of all, Sunday, and then there were religious objections to that again. So it had to be called Sundae. Yes, we got it all, essentially. Dennis.
Also, they considered, I suppose, phrases like Knickerbocker glory were inflammatory.
Well, certainly. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and Euclid and his Modern Rivals.
Alice's Adventures and Euclid, actually they were all written by the same person.
Yes, and he was?
Lewis Carroll.
Do you remember his other name?
No.
That's right. Yes, because he wouldn't have signed his Euclidean work as
Lewis Carroll.
Lewis Carroll.
No, he was a mathematician.
He was a mathematician, that's right. The Reverend C.L. Dodgson, he was a Don at Oxford, and he wrote mathematical treatises under his real name, and he wrote Alice's Adventures in Wonderland Through the Looking Glass and the Snark as Lewis Carroll. 2 marks.
Is it true? Is it true that this is the book? Because Queen Victoria was supposed to have said, we enjoyed your books very much. We would be pleased to receive your next publication. And she got this Euclid and his modern.
I think that's very true. I didn't know that myself at all. Jolly good. Well, we come now to the last round and to Frank and Dennis's quotations. The marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Frank, your quotation is, to travel hopefully is better than to arrive. It comes from Robert Louis Stevenson.
Yes, Robert Louis, yes, it's a very good thing, isn't it, to travel hopefully. I'm not going to do a story. I thought it might be fun if I didn't do a story tonight. I'll fill in the time, don't worry. But say to invent a story, I'd tell a little truth. And I'd give the second half of the continuing saga of my trip around the English-speaking world, which is to do with it, isn't it? I mean, it's better to travel, hopefully, than to arrive. It's akin. And I could do a rave, you know, how superb everything was, and the accommodation was lovely. Well, the accommodation was pretty good, actually. In South Africa, we were given for one night free and au gratin at the Chobe Game Reserve Lodge, the suite occupied by Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, with its own private swimming pool. How about that? Which we went in starkers. My lady wife and I bathed naked. we were just leaving, you see, and we had about 10 minutes before the car came, and we didn't know what to do with wet costumes. So we went into the pool, and actually we were for about a minute and a quarter, because then the manager came in with the packed lunches. A little occasion. And the other thing, we had some jolly good food around the world, but some food is rather odd and surprising to our insular British tastes. The best steaks I had around the world came from our butchers in Egham. And the worst came from Chicago. And there's a very... I don't know if anybody in the studio audience is from New Zealand, but if you go to New Zealand, there's a cultural shock when you first meet white-bait fritters. New Zealanders are very sensitive about white-bait fritters and visitors' reaction to them. In fact, on arriving at the tarmac, my lapels were gripped by a New Zealander who said, "Robert Morley didn't like our white-bait fritters." Now, you know, in England, for white-bait fritters, you expect those delicate little fish, lightly browned and crisp. Well, in New Zealand, and an excellent dish it is, but when you first eat it, it's like a failed pancake stuffed with maggots. Look, the worst aspect of the tour, for me, in America, where my wife wasn't with me, was laundry. It's a very lonely thing, travelling, and I found myself talking to myself in curiously archaic slang. I say, "Come along, Frank, old lad, old lad, old lad. Time to do your washing." All this dreadful stuff. And with the washing, what you do, if you ever have to do an author's tour, is when you get in about 9 o'clock from the previous town, you fly in, unpack the essentials, then you strip off, except for your socks. Because there's something to do with the shape of a sock and the shape of a human hand, but they can't be washed efficiently off the foot. So you leave your socks on, then you strip off. Then you get the waste paper basket, which is made of plastic. You don't use the wash basin, because American plugs work mechanically from a kind of plunger, and they don't seat properly. And if you try to wash in the wash basin, all your suds have gone before half a handkerchief is done. So you get hold of the waste paper basket, put the day's shirt in, hankies, knickers, fill it with hot water from the shower, put your detergent in, then leave it. Then get into the shower, have your shower, soaping your socks carefully, which also washes your feet at the same time. And then you go to bed and you switch on the television. You switch on American television, and in 5 seconds the eyelids flutter and you're into a deep, deep state. Well, that was what... No, I didn't tell you a story. I could have done a rave about how marvellous it was, but I just dribbled on, hoping that this would give you a much truer picture of what happens. And in a way, I think that is the way to tell stories. I rather agree with Robert Louis Stevenson that to drivel, hopefully, is better than do a rave.
Well, now let's see how Denis gets on with his quotation. And if you remember, that was a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, from Romeo and Juliet. Denis.
I'm glad I got that one, because as it happens, I've got rather a special interest in names, because a couple of years back, I was taken on by a well-known advertising agency to work in what you could more or less call their naming department. I'm not sure what my exact official status was. I think it was something along the lines of assistant underling. But my function was to use everything I picked up on this program to give a literary flavour to the renaming of the various shops and products that the agency handled. You see, it's become an economic fact of life that nowadays, when you've got, say, an ironmonger's shop, if you just name it, say, George Smith and Sons, you might as well pack it in before you start. What you now have to call it is something like Handyman Haven or Tools Paradise, something that kind of thing. So this advertising agency had set up a special renaming service to its clients, which it offered under the slogan, "You've got it, we name it." And why I was conscripted to contribute the literary touches was because if the name of a commercial enterprise smacks of anything to do with books or quotations, it then becomes what's known as upmarket, which means they can charge more for it, and therefore the place becomes frequented by all the better shoplifters. I think I can say that my contribution to the whole of this process was not inconsiderable. Thanks to me, there is now a flower shop in Stonehenge which goes under the name of the Petrified Florist. And among the Shakespearean touches that I managed to infiltrate is the out-damned spot dry cleaners and the as you leak it plumbing service. Among the product lines I can claim some credit for are the birth control device which was rechristened Love's Labour Loss, and the packets of sugar substitute which are now put out under the name of Adversity. Because if you remember, sweet are the uses of adversity. Of course, as is the way of things in the advertising world, once you've scored a few hits in your specialised area, they straight away shove you over to the more generalised accounts. And that's why there's now a best-selling kitchen deodorant which bears the appellation Arrivederci Aroma. Although I privately consider my most effective achievement to have been when I persuaded a successful red-headed bookmaker to change his name from Mr. Ginger Cross to Mr. Red Cross, so that all the cheques that his clients sent him for gambling debts, you see, can now be submitted to the Inland Revenue as charitable contributions. The agent says no. The agency says no. The agency says what they're most grateful to me for was the dodge that I suggested when a leading confectionery manufacturer was having sales problems with one of his principal lines. Having long marketed it as Old English mint humbugs, they were now looking for some sneaky ruse whereby, without having to change the product formulation in any way, they could make it more acceptable to today's sweet-buying public. Well, after brainstorming and think-tanking the problem, which was the advertising name for sitting with your eyes closed in front of a typewriter, I suddenly saw the solution. I said, look, I said to the manufacturers, as your unique selling platform is based on Old English humbug, all you need to do is rename it after any one of the characters in Britain's best-loved radio serial. Just rename them Walter Gabriel's, I said, or Aunt Laura's. Get the sweet-buying customers asking for 2 ounces of John Tregoran's or a half a pound of Mr. Woolley's. I am positive, I said, and here all that my word training unconsciously swum up into my brain, a ruse by any Archer name would sell a sweet.
Well, by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the story, and he and Anne Scott James also win the entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
Taking part in My Word were Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore, and the programme was produced by Tony Shrine. My Word. Game devised by Tony Shrine and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
We go straight into the first round, which is about words. This week about some useful, but perhaps not very often used, verbs. 2 marks if I can be told what activity these verbs are trying to define. Beginning with Denis Norden. Dennis, yours is to absquatulate. A-B-S-Q-U-A-T-U-L-A-T-E, absquatulate.
I think it's probably the only word in the language that begins ABSQ.
Yeah.
For the benefit of people who don't so much study this for the English, but for the Scrabble possibility. And I associate it with books like The Magnet of my youth, where Hari Ramsit Jam Singh used to say, let us absquatulate yourself. And it's this kind of activity that was indulged in by people like Christmas club treasurers and bookies. In other words, they made off when they should have stayed where they were.
Very hurriedly.
Very hurriedly.
Yes, that's absolutely right. 2 marks. It means that to decamp or abscond. Oddly enough, it can also mean to squat, but that I don't think it's in England. This is an American word, and it came over here in about 1860 and became totally obsolete by 1900. Dilys Powers next, and your verb, Dilys, is to nidify, N-I-D-I-F-Y. Or it can be nidificate, if you prefer it.
Does a very remote acquaintance with French help?
Yes, it would.
It does. Well, nid, or knee, means a nest.
Nidify?
A nidify would mean to bring straws home and make a nest.
Quite right. To build a nest, or more than one nest as well. 2 marks. Frank Muir, to sniggle. S-N-I-G-G-L-E. Sniggle.
I think this is one of those portmanteau words, like to stroam, which is halfway between stroll and roam. To sniggle means it's halfway between a snigger and a giggle. It's one of those things where you go...
No. You better get to country sports.
It's one of those things where you hurl the cheese at the pegs.
It's more watery than that.
I got a sniggle there.
Yes.
Say a game of sniggle in the water.
Well,
you throw the sniggle.
You do it in a curious way.
You do. You throw the sniggle.
But you've got to explain why and what's it doing.
Is there any connection between sniggle and wiggle?
At the other end of a sniggle is a very nice wiggle.
It's a girl.
Yes, striptease.
No. It's still watery. Think of the most wiggly, watery creature that you can think of.
It's tadpole.
Not wiggly enough.
To sniggle is to
catch the frog.
Is to catch a tadpole and put it in a jam jar full of warm water.
I give you 1 mark. You've got the wrong creature, and that's why I say it was wiggly. It's to fish for eels by pushing a baited hook into their hiding places, because snig is one of the dialect words for a river eel. So sniggling, you're catching them.
Well, that was warm.
Not a bit. The eel's very cold. 1 more. Anne Scott James, to transmogrify. T-R-I-N-S-M-O-G-R-I-F-Y. Transmogrify.
This seems to be another rather etymologically unsound word. When Zeus transformed himself into a swan,
yes,
or a bull,
yeah,
or a golden shower, or a peacock, might it be said that he transmogrified himself?
Yes, I'm doing it as often as that. It might well be called transmogrification. Yes, 2 marks. It's yes. It's a sort of concocted word. It might have an origin in transmigration, though nobody's quite certain. And it means to alter or transmute your form or appearance, and to do it perhaps in a pretty grotesque way. 2 marks, Anne. Before we go on to the next round, here are the quotations that Frank and Dennis have been given for the last round. And Dennis, yours is, if I were a bell, I'd be ringing. And yours, Frank, where are the snows of yesteryear? So we come in round 2 to a round of possible literary myths. 2 marks. Can you give me a reason why some doubt might be cast
on the following generally accepted beliefs. Denis Norden, that Napoleon was the first to describe the English as a nation of shopkeepers.
Presumably because he wasn't.
Yeah, I think that's probable.
Shop stewards. There's a corruption. You breathed deeply there, Anne. Was that...
Just because I thought it was so difficult, that was all.
Oh, that's great help. Yeah. Well, sympathy is nearly as good as assistance. I don't know. Nation of... he didn't say that at all.
I think he did, but...
Oh.
I think what he in fact said was sono mercanti, which is, as far as I know, either Italian or Corsican Italian.
Yes.
Just great
of my auntie.
Well, presumably he wasn't... You say he was the first to say it?
That's what the belief is.
Ah, well, the belief is wrong. He was the third to say it.
I think you're dead right. I'll give you your 2 marks. This is a bit difficult. There was a chap called Adam Smith who wrote The Wealth of Nations, and in 1775 he coins the phrase, to found a great empire may appear a project fit only for a nation of shopkeepers, and it's known that Napoleon read Adam Smith, but he also had another Corsican chum, he was a Corsican, called Powell, who probably said it in about the same year, so that's number 2. And then there's another American called Samuel Adams, who in 1776 used a similar phrase, and it's only long after Napoleon's death that the phrase was attributed to him. So he probably used it, but not the first.
Yeah, he was the 4th by your count.
3rd or 4th, yes, I'm not quite certain about it. This I hope a bit easier, that the belief that Cinderella wore glass slippers.
Well, I believe there's a kind of ancient belief that ver
yes.
didn't really mean glass, it was fur.
Absolutely right. Just to enlarge that a little, in an early French version of the fairy story, Cinderella wore pantoufle en ver, V-A-I-R, which means a kind of white or bluish-grey fur, probably made from squirrels, and this was mistranslated by Charles Perrault. He mistook V-A-I-R for V-E-R-R-E, which means a glass. And it's been glass slippers ever since, which makes it extremely awkward in pantomimes. I mean, much easier if we've done it in fur. And you get your 2 marks. Frank Muir. Yours, Frank. The belief that the Duke of Wellington remarked that the Battle of Waterloo was won in the playing fields of Eton.
Well, he didn't say it. That's the myth.
We can't prove that one way or other, I think.
Well, I think we can, can't we not? Can we not? Can't we? It's, it was one of those things that was written.
Yes.
By a French historian and political philosopher called Montalembert.
Quite right.
And the family, the Duke of Wellington's family, is always strenuous. He denied he ever said it. Mm-hmm. So he didn't say it.
I think...
he never said lots of things attributed to him.
For knowing about Montalembert doing this, I'm going to give you 2.5 marks. It was pretty good. Montalembert didn't write until 1855, which was 40 years after the Battle of Waterloo, and he was writing a book about, or treatise about the future, the political future of England. He probably got it wrong. But the reason why it's unlikely that Wellington ever said this was that in 1815, or a bit before, there were no field or organised games at Eton at all, and it didn't have any playing fields. So, 2.5 marks. Anne Scott James, yours goes back a bit further. The belief that Eve gave Adam an apple in the Garden of Eden.
Well, I can only assume that, botanically speaking, there weren't any apples around at that time, and Eve must have given Adam a pear. I gather from your laughter, Jack, that I'm not warm.
Yes, you're roughly in the right direction.
Did she give him something or other?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I know. Let us keep this.
If you could you possibly remember the Genesis quotation?
The fruit of the tree of
that's
knowledge,
right.
wasn't it?
Yes, that's right.
So it was fruit of some kind.
Yes.
Well, we've just got to be more generalised, have we? And say she gave
this
him
is
a
right.
fruit.
No, you're 2 marks.
Have a piece of fruit, she said.
What Genesis chapter 3 says, and this is Adam talking to God, who was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, the woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat, which was a pretty good bit of sneaking.
Gave him the tree?
The fruit of the tree.
Oh.
Sorry. And it wasn't until later, as far as I know, it starts turning up in medieval paintings that you can see quite clearly it was an apple, but to start with...
Well, listen, I've got a new idea. The oldest tree known, I think, is the prehistoric tree, the metasequoia. And I think she gave him a pinecone off the metasequoia.
He said it tasted nice, and I doubt whether that would.
Well, it could. After all, we all love pine kernels.
Apples surely didn't exist in those days.
I don't know.
Well,
there's not
I think a metasequoia is quite
the golden
famous
apples,
tree.
the Hesperides, were oranges.
Oranges, that's right. But the alternative theory, of course, as when they'd done this, they got ashamed of their nakedness and dressed themselves in fig leaves. Possibly the fruit was a fig.
A fig.
Would we know? Anyway, the
Not
whole point
in the
I
heat.
think they'd have been so repelled by the tree by then.
Not in the heat of the day. If you eat figs in the heat of the day, diarrhea.
There's none of that in Genesis. No, 2 marks.
Exodus, perhaps.
Well, I heave a deep breath here, and we go on to another round. This is a round of literate quotations. For 2 marks, who made these comments or observations on the art of writing? Denis Norden, yours is, only a mediocre writer is always at his best.
Well, this sort of quotation I'm not at my best with. Actually, Jack, I really don't know who it is.
Dr. Leavish.
No, I mean...
it's a very good line.
It's a good line. Oh, I don't know, somewhere like Cap Ferrar, I think you've got to go to.
Oh, well, around that part of the world.
I know.
Somerset Maugham.
Yes,
Yeah.
Well done. A certain amount of help there. 1.5 marks. Dilys Powell, what is written without effort is in general read without pleasure.
I have a feeling that Frank is going to know this.
Yes, I think he will.
I don't. Easy writing makes hard reading.
Which it does. Which certainly does.
It sounds like Montaigne, is that kind of...
No, I think it's later.
Nera Holmes,
Later.
Frank, favourite character of yours.
Favourite character of yours? Johnson. Dr. Johnson.
Johnson it is,
Dr.
again.
Johnson.
No, I think we just get shot to on the whole.
No.
It comes in anecdotes by William Sewell, and there's a splendid example of Johnson's triumphant inconsistency, because just before he's been listening to a violinist playing, and he says, "Difficult, do you call it, sir? I wish it were impossible." And he goes on. He says, what's written without effort is in general read without pleasure. Good Johnsonianism. Frank Muir. Another damned thick, square book, always scribble, scribble, scribble. Eh, Mr. Gibbon?
It's a bit of a gift, isn't it? William Henry, Duke of Gloucester.
Yes.
When Gibbon presented Volume 2 of Decline and Fall of the Holy Roman Empire, Unbended Knee, William Henry, Duke of Gloucester, indicated the Hanoverian dynasty's attitude towards literature.
Absolutely right. 2 marks straight away. Anne Scott James, yours is 3 hours a day will produce as much as a man ought to write.
Oh, dear. Dennis, you've got any thoughts on this?
No, not at all. Isn't it clues? It's mathematical.
He did a regular stint of writing every day.
Not Trollope, is it?
Yes.
No,
Yes.
really? I thought
Well
he
done.
did more than that.
No, that's
Oh,
correct.
Anthony Trollope.
It's a bit of a liberty, actually, because he had a steady job in the post office.
That's right.
So
Yes.
he only needed to work 3 hours a day.
Well, it's rather like
Right, 3 hours.
Larry, who only painted in the evenings because he had some similar regular job. It's Anthony Trollope's autobiography, chapter 15. 2 marks. Well, now we come to the last round, and to Dennis and Frank's quotations, and the marks will be awarded on the lengthy applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Dennis, you'll remember your quotation is, "If I were a bell, I'd be ringing," and I'm told it's written by Frank Lesser,
It comes from guys and dolls.
Yes, you're told right, Jack. Almost 1 century ago, in the year 1876, the gentleman who invented the telephone picked up the instrument, said hello to his assistant, who was stationed several miles away. Then, for quite a few minutes, they conducted the very first conversation over what were then the only 2 telephones in the whole world. Now, I mention that fact for only one reason, because it was probably the very last time in recorded history that anyone made a telephone call without getting a wrong number, hearing the engage signal, or breaking in on a middle-aged woman saying, "It seems to have gone all red and angry looking." What I'm trying to say is that since that day in 1876, as far as the telephone's use in helping people communicate with each other is concerned, it's just been downhill all the way. Are you having trouble getting the dialing tone? An operator said to me once, after I'd mentioned to her that I'd made 7 unsuccessful attempts to speak to Frank. I had no trouble at all getting the dialing tone. In fact, I get it halfway through every call I make. Now, this, I must mention, was after the introduction of what is known as the STD system, a system of dialing, which, according to the Post Office, was going to be one of the greatest time savers of the decade, which it certainly did prove to be. There's no doubt at all that by means of STD, you can now get 3 wrong numbers in the time it used to take to get only 1. What is more, instead of, as before, being able to dial only local calls yourself, you can now dial direct to practically anywhere in the world. So not only has STD enabled us to get wrong numbers more quickly, we can now get them in 4 different continents. In other words, any simple message that you wish to pass over Alexander Bell's electrical instrument now entails so much dialing, it's led to a physical ailment hitherto unknown to medical science, cauliflower forefinger. Now, this is to say nothing of another development that Alexander probably never foresaw, the public telephone box. Now, there are several reasons why this is a unique amenity. In the first place, the telephone box is designed so that whichever direction you approach it from, the door is always on the other side. Secondly, all telephone boxes are constructed on what you might call the civil servant principle. Only 3 out of 4 work. As for that 4th one, the one that hasn't been visited by that pervert who goes around London telephone boxes gluing down receivers, that 4th one has a drawback as well. It's always got somebody already in it. And not just any somebody. Now, if you're one of those people who still hold on to the belief that the art of conversation is dead, let me offer you a suggestion. Just listen to the person who's talking inside the telephone box that you're standing outside. You don't know what aggro means until you see them start that movement where they take the receiver off one ear and place it more comfortably on the other ear. All in all, I sometimes wonder whether if Alexander Bell could now see how his invention turned out, would he have any regrets? If Alexander Graham Bell is looking down on what's happened with his machine, is he now wringing his hands in remorse? Because I'm sure of one thing, if I were a Bell, I'd be ringing.
was a remorselessly accurate picture. And now we go on to Frank Muir and to his quotation, "Where are the snows of yesteryear," which is the medieval French poet Francois Villon in one of his ballads. So, Frank.
I had a thought the other week. I didn't do anything with it. I should probably have a thought in a week or two's time. There was a time when I had a thought, many thoughts every day. And the difference is now that, I don't know, one gets so sort of tired during the day. You notice that, Dilys? And it's something to do with our modern life, that the pattern of sleep and rest has changed. When the world and I was young, sleep somehow was no problem. My mother told me that I slept soundly and without batting an eyelid until I was 3.5. When I was first married, my wife had to prise me out of bed in the mornings with the prop from the clothesline. But now, I don't know, it's all rather different, and sleep is difficult with the stresses and strains of the modern world. If I sleep on my back, for instance, I snore. And in the morning, the uvula, that little sort of lump of stuff at the back of the throat, normally the size of a pea, has grown into a sort of hot, wet walnut. So that when I answer the phone in the morning, I say, "Yes, it's Frank Muir here." And they say, "Are you all right?" And I say, "Yes." You know, it gets better, but and if I sleep on my left side, and not on my back when I snore, if I sleep on my left side, I can hear my heartbeat. It goes, "Gadunk, gadunk, gadunk." Gadunk, gadunk, gadunk. I think, keep going, lad. Terribly worrying. Why can't we do what our forefathers did, you see? They didn't sleep at all. They worked late and they rose early, the Victorians and the Edwardians. And you get, always, you read in journals of Arnold Bennett, you know, I had my luncheon, I went and had 40 winks. And 20 minutes later, awoke refreshed. And you try having... They loved 40 winks in those days. You know, it was a thing that they... You know, they did songs about it. You remember, "Oh, 40 winks, 40 winks." You can't have 40 winks nowadays. You try having 40 winks on the beach. You know, all old postcards show Dad asleep in a deck chair with a handkerchief knotted at all four corners, zizzing away happily. You know, 4 minutes on the average beach, and a frisbee gets you on the bridge of the nose. Or some moppet rushing along with an ice cream cone, it trips. And you get an earful of blackcurrant ripple. You just can't do it. And if I tried it in my study. And I had the 2 boiled eggs, inch of Cheshire, half a banana, went back into the study, lay back in the chair and tried to compose myself, 40 winks and a ziz, to make up this lost sleep. You can't do that with Afghans, because Afghans do the nose trick. So they have these long bony noses and really quite powerful beasts. He got his nose, her nose, under my thigh and sort of jerked upwards. And the Burmese cat was asleep on my head at the time, which rather upset the centre of gravity, and I was over on my back, over the back of the chair. You know, it's absolutely useless nowadays. Why can't we go back to those old times when one could catch up on one's rest during the day? You can get a night's sleep nowadays by buying one of those pills, which sounds like an ancient classical city, Ilium or Verinalum or something. But where, I ask you, where is the snooze of yesteryear?
Well, by your votes, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Muir wins the story contest, but the overall contest on this occasion is a draw.
Taking part in My Word were Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore and the programme was produced by Tony Shrine. My Word. Panel game devised by Tony Shrine and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
And we go straight into the first round, which is about words. And this week it's about elementary medical words, as might be bandied about between the doctor and the nurse. For 2 marks, what in layman's language is the meaning of the following? We begin with Frank Muir. Frank, you've got an embolism. E-M-B-O-L-I-S-M.
Embolism? Embolism was a sort of early 16th century heresy, wasn't it? Embolism, Dieter Embol, in the Protestant Swiss valleys. He reckoned that people should worship standing on their head as a sort of higher form of, and
that might have done some medical damage.
Well, no, it didn't. But all the other sects, and there were a lot of heretical sects around at the time, and the Roman Catholic Church just dismissed them as a lot of clots. And then the medical people latched onto this, and embolism is a blood clot, isn't it?
Yes. Well, it isn't itself blood, but
well, it's a blockage.
That's right. That'll do. Embolism medically is a obstruction of an artery or a vein by globules of air or fat, if you're unlucky, which can cause all sorts of things like paralysis and possibly heart attack. It means, from the Greek, a stopper or a plug. But taking Frank back into the early days, it also meant, and that may have been what he was hinting at, the bit where the calendar went all wrong and you had to fit in 2 or 3 extra days in order to get it right again. And that was an embolism too. It's just the opposite, Frank, of what one of your favourite subjects, which is give us back our 11 days.
It never occurred to me, actually, I must be honest, so I can't claim a bonus now, the calendar bit.
Get your 2. 2 marks. Anne Scott James, and yours is a placebo, Placebo, placebo.
Oh, you hear much more about these than you did in my young days. I think with neurotic patients in particular, the doctor gives them a nice pink pill, yes, or a bottle of purple medicine, which is in fact valueless. It's just coloured water or a coloured pill with it's a tranquilizer, really.
Yes, I think that'll do.
Years ago, I was in Moscow for 5 days, and the only sort of word I learned, which was a very useful one, is spasibo. Which means sort of thank you and everything. It's spasibo. And I got it wrong, and the whole of my 5 days I said placebo. Didn't mean anything to either of us.
What did you get, an enema or something? Now it's Denis Norden's turn. Denis, yours is a hematoma, H-A-E-M-A-T-O-M-A, hematoma.
Hematoma is the condition with which an Italian wife describes why her husband isn't at work. I really don't know.
Would you...
But as hema, believe is something to do with blood,
That's
generally.
Right. Yep.
What a toma is, it isn't an atom of blood, is it?
No.
There's a swelling, isn't there?
Swelling of blood.
Yes, if you make your stay-at-home husband a bit more actively disliking his wife, he might produce this on her corpus.
Oh.
Blood blister.
Well, no, not
Love bite.
1.5. It's, in simple language, it is a bruise. And that is, it's a quantity of blood effused into the tissue round the blood vessels, the connective tissue, and the medical word is hematoma. 1.5. Dennis Powell, yours. Tachycardia. Tachycardia. Tachycardia.
Well, cardia means heart in Greek,
Yes.
ancient or modern.
Sticky heart.
Sticky heart, or not sticky, rapid heart.
An accelerated
Moving
heart.
rapidly. In fact, what I believe was once known as palpitations.
Yes, I think that'll do. 2 marks. It's an increase in the rate of the heartbeat, can be occasioned in various ways by taking too much exercise, by a fever. It can be a thing which goes on for quite a long time, and then it becomes a disease. And it can be, I suppose, produced by emotion, if you're unlucky. So it simply means your heart is beating much more rapidly than it normally should.
I get that, don't you? Oh, that's it, yeah.
Well, before we go on to the next round, here are the quotations that you've been given for the last round, and yours, Frank Muir, is the unspeakable in full pursuit of the uneatable, and yours, Dennis, is a storm in a teacup. Well, this next round is a round of vocational vernacular, and for 2 marks, I want members of the teams to hazard a guess at the trade or profession or calling to whose special language the following words or phrases belong. Frank Muir starts again, and yours are a half bat, a bull nose, a dog leg, and a squint.
Half bat's a brick.
That's right, that's what I wanted.
I built a brick wall.
That's what I hoped you'd do.
A very small brick wall.
Yes.
And there's a question of whether I had half bats or wire cuts.
That's right.
Wire cuts are bricked. Yeah.
That's it, and so are half headers. Yes, you're right. This is the trade or art of bricklaying. These are all different sizes or shapes or manufactures of brick. 2 marks. And Scott James now. A web strainer, a cabriole hammer, a regulator, and feathers.
A cabriole, of course, is a kind of leg you get on a chair.
Yes, or the chair itself.
Is it carpentering?
Well, after you've had your carpentry, it's rather hard to sit on. What happens next?
Cane. You've got to upholster.
That's right.
It's all to do with, the web. Yes, of course, the upholstery web. Upholstery, Jack.
Absolutely right. 2 marks. The first 3, the web strainer, the cabriole hammer, and the regulator, I'm told, are tools that you use in the act of stuffing the stuffed bit of your furniture. And feathers, of course, are what you could stuff it with if you like to. There are plenty of other alternatives. Denis Norden's turn, and your lot is this. Capture ratio, a dropout, a hum loop, and a flapping baffle.
Well, the only 2 words that bring any tiny tinkle are hum, loop, and a baffle is to do with loudspeakers and things,
Yes.
isn't it? So it's to do with sound. The sound engineers would use all
Absolutely right, Dennis. This is sound or hi-fi engineering, and the terms are so technical that even if I knew what the answer was, I couldn't begin to describe them to you. So I give 2 marks rapidly to Dennis for an absolutely accurate answer.
The two hi-fi words that I like are woofers and tweeters, which I always think, those sort of rather posh restaurants which the loos are never labelled ladies and gentlemen. They're always sort of senors and senoritas and things like that. I always think that they should label one woofers and one...
Now to this Powell. saddle grafting, a Geneva double curtain, the Lentz-Moser system, and the noble rottenness.
Noble what?
Rottenness.
Rottenness?
I'll put it into French, which might possibly help you.
Yes.
It's called pourriture noble. That might help. You were benefiting from it about a quarter of an hour ago.
Oh, vineyards with wine growing.
Yes.
Vineyard culture, viniculture.
Yes, I helped you an awful lot, but
no.
Could you hazard a guess of what they mean when they say noble rottenness? Frank might help.
This is a quotation, isn't it? Noble rottenness. It's when the grape has.
It comes very sweet, doesn't
it? Yeah, it's when it's left to rot.
Yep.
White wine, I think, isn't it?
Mostly white wine. Yes.
German, I think. German wine.
Yeah. Sounds like the opposite of noblesse oblige.
Yes, you're thinking about Trockenbeere Auslese with hock. Yes. They leave the grapes on the vine.
Until they're absolutely dry.
Until they're dry.
Very sweet.
Nearly rotten and very sweet. Good. Well, these are all to do with what's called either viticulture or viniculture, which is the growing of grapes for the greater glory of wine producing. We owe a lot to a lot of people who are expert on these things.
It's the hick. You have to hike into the hock.
Well, now we have a round of incomplete quotations, and 2 marks again. I just want to know the line of poetry that follows on the one I'm going to quote, and I'd like to have the author's name too. Frank Muir, and know then thyself, presume not God to scan.
To know thyself, the proper study of mankind is man.
Quite right. Author?
Alexander Pope.
Yes.
Essay on Man.
Quite right. 2 marks straight away. Well done. Anne Scott James, the man recovered of the bite.
Oh, this is Goldsmith, isn't it?
Yes.
Poem on a mad dog.
Yes, and the next line.
Now, can you tell me what that one was again? I forgot. What was the line you gave?
The man recovered of the bite.
The dog it was that died.
Absolutely right. Goldsmith's elegy on the death of a mad dog. The dog, to gain some private ends, went mad and bit the man. And it was the man who survived and the dog that died. 2 marks. Denis Norden. But the she-bear, thus accosted, rends the peasant tooth and nail.
For the female of the species is more deadly than the male.
Whether we should get past the Sex Discrimination Act on that one, I don't know. Author?
Kipling.
Kipling in The Female of the Species. 2 marks. Dennis Powell. And then from hour to hour we rot and rot.
Did we? Not. I don't think I have the faintest idea.
Can't help you, dear.
No, you can, dear.
Go to Arden.
Oh, the Forest of Arden.
Mm-hmm.
Forest of Arden.
Easy.
It's Shakespeare.
Yes, quite.
It's Shakespeare.
Yes.
It's As You Like It.
Yes.
As You Like It.
I'll give you a bit more of a mark if you can think who might possibly have said these things.
Jaques.
Good for you.
Melancholy Jaques. Yes.
1.5, a lot of help there. It, in fact, is Jaques in As You Like It, Shakespeare, quoting, or so he says, Touchstone, whom he'd found mouthing out these phrases in the middle of the forest, and he's telling the Duke what Touchstone had been saying. 1.5. Well, now we come to the last round, and Frank and Denis's quotations, and the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Frank, if you remember, your quotation is the unspeakable in full pursuit of the uneatable, which is Oscar Wilde, his remark on hunting.
Well, I thought it was Oscar Wilde, and I was disillusioned last weekend when I was in Dublin. It poured with rain all the time, and I was wearing suede shoes, and they got soaked through. And it's ridiculous to wear suede shoes in Dublin as it is to wear flippers to an evening of Scottish dancing. But I was sitting in my hotel in the Royal Hibernian, has a sort of lounge with a roaring peat fire, and I had my feet up, and my suedes were steaming, and the night porter said to me, "Are you going to the hunting tomorrow?" And I said, "Oh, the unspeakable in full pursuit of the uneatable," as Oscar Wilde said. And he said, "Oscar Wilde didn't say that. It was me grandfather Patrick." So I said, really? And he said, yes. And it appears that a lot of Oscar Wilde's famous play titles and phrases, like Lady Windermere's Fan, The Importance of Being Earnest, didn't originate with Oscar Wilde at all, but with the night porter of the Royal Hibernian Hotels, Grandfather Patrick. It appears that, I can't do the Irish accent, so you have to be reported speech, but around about 1860, the young Oscar Wilde went to stay at a country house where the night porter's grandfather was the sort of estate man. It was Lord Bale's estate in the Wicklow Hills, and it was quite a small party. There was Lady Winifred, the daughter, who was a young and pert 12-year-old, and there was a nephew, the Honourable Edward, who was a gay young spark of 24, a rather sort of lecherous young man whose nickname was Sparky. And there was a distant cousin, a most beautiful but voluptuous girl called the Honourable Henrietta, who was known as Etta. Lady Winifred, this tiny little tot of 12, who was very disorderly, and she spent the afternoon throwing cream buns up at the ceiling of the dining room. So they'd stick there. Then during the dinner part at the evening, they'd dry out and descend on the heads of the guests. And she was chastised by his lordship and her ladyship, and she ran to the night porter's grandfather Patrick, and he comforted her. And Oscar Wilde saw that and said, it's funny that she seems to like you. And he said, that is the grandfather of the night porter, said, she's a little devil to the other people, but, Lady Win to me is fun. So he got out his notebook, Oscar Wilde, and wrote, that's a good phrase, I might be able to use that. Lady Windermere's fun. And next day, they were breaking in a pony to fit the trap. And when the pony had finally allowed all the bridle and the leatherwork to be put on them, he stood there so proudly. And Oscar Wilde said, the pony really seems to enjoy all that. And the night porter's grandfather Patrick said, oh, yes. It's the importance of being harnessed. So Oscar Wilde took out his notebook and said, that's a good phrase, I'll be able to make use of that. And that late afternoon of the same day, he got this phrase, the unspeakable in full pursuit of the uneatable, from the night porter's grandfather Patrick. It happened because they were strolling together, because they then got on quite well, near the shrubbery. And it's a vast shrubbery at Lord Bale's estate. And all the afternoon they'd seen nothing of Sparky, who was leering at the Honourable Henrietta all afternoon, and every time he looked at her cheek mantled. And every time he gazed at her in profile, because she had a figure which would warp a 10-inch teak plank at 50 paces, steam came out of his, Sparky's ears, and they seemed to have disappeared from the house party. And suddenly there was a tremendous noise in the shrubbery. There was a hunting horn went, and there was a sort of female giggles, and then the voice of Sparky saying, "Phew, hello! I see the little beast. I'll get her." And Oscar Wilde said, "What's going on? Are they fox hunting?" And the night porter's grandfather Patrick said, "Well, sir, yes, it is a hunt, sir. It is that, but it's not a fox hunt, sir. There's no fox, sir, and there's no horses, and there's no hounds." So Oscar Wilde said, "Well, what sort of hunt is it?" And he said, "Well, sir, let me put it this way. 'Tis the Hun Sparky Bale in full pursuit of the Hun Etta Bale."
Well, after those terrible goings-on in the 19th century, we turned to Denis Norden. If you remember, his quotation was,
a storm in a teacup.
Well, of all the varieties of bores in this world, the ones that I find the most bone-aching are those enthusiasts who, when it's a clear night, drag you outside and insist on showing you where all the stars and the constellations are and exactly what each one's name is. Now, it just so happens that I'm one of those people who is, A, physically incapable of distinguishing one star from another, B, doesn't really feel any need to distinguish one star from another, and C, as a result of trying to distinguish one star from another, had my face kicked in by a professional astronomer. Having said which, I think C is the one that needs some elaborating on. It so happened that during that very hot summer we had, whilst I was at a dinner party given at by one of our better-off neighbours, it turned out to be a really draggy affair, one of those gatherings where everyone was called Tristram or Imogen or Cressida. And the women all had clanking bracelets all the way up each arm, and their husbands were dressed to a man in those kind of casual shirts that looked like leftover wallpaper. And all that the lady I sat next to at dinner talked about right through the meal was worming her dog. Well, after dinner, we all gathered in one hot room. There must have been about 80 of us. The noise level rose to about force 8. The temperature soared to a point where even the ice cubes felt warm. So I unobtrusively slipped out into the garden. And I suddenly became conscious of a figure in the middle of the lawn. It was a rather attractive lady standing stock still, her face in the air, her mouth half open, and nostrils quivering. Now, as that's a posture familiar to anyone who's recently tried to give up smoking, I hastened over to her, and just as I was about to offer a life-saving peppermint, she uttered the dreaded opening line. "Have you noticed how clear the stars are tonight?" My heart sank. The mere mention of that question, and I am always immediately overwhelmed with a desire for thick fog. Thrusting a finger upwards, she said, "Look, that's Ursa Major," rather as though she was referring to Frank Sinatra. "Do you realise," she said, "the light from Ursa Major takes 4 billion years to arrive here?" I said it must come by post. Making a sort of feeble effort to change the subject. But there is absolutely no deflecting these suburban Galileos. She said, "Shall I show you how to find Cassiopeia?" I said, "No, thanks." She said, "All you have to do is locate the plough." I said, "Well, I learnt that at Scouts." I said, it's up around there, isn't it?" I made a vague gesture that, astronomically speaking, encompassed about 38 million square light years. But I'm sorry, I said, I really can't go further than that, because if I stand looking upwards for any length of time, I get a funny kind of dizzy spell. And she said, "Well, never mind." She said, "Lie on the ground." I said, "I beg your pardon." She said, "Well, my husband is a professional astronomer, and that's what we always do when he can't get to his telescopic apparatus." "Like this," she said. And with which she got down on the grass and stretched out full length on her back. So, like a nana, I also lay down on the grass about 3 feet away. And as we both gazed upwards, she said, "Now look, just beyond the point of the plough. Do you see it?" And I said, Yes, I do. It's sort of blinking on and off, and it's moving towards Hounslow." And she said, no, she said, that's the last Alitalia from Milan. She said, look, just fix yourself about 3 degrees south of the plough. Do you see it now? I said, no. She said, well, I can see it distinctly. I said, well, you must be a bit nearer to it. She said, well, look, you come over here and lie on top of me. I said, do what? She said, I've got it exactly. She said, if you stretch out above me, you could just let your eyes follow the direction of my pointing finger. Well, by that time, it got to the point when I just wasn't going to let myself be beat by some small overhead dot of light. So I did just that. And it was while I was lying full length on my back on top of this lady, straining my eyes into the night, that all of a sudden I heard a male voice say, what exactly is this? And I said, well, if you're looking in the right direction, it's Cassiopeia. Do you know that chap's boot altered the shape of my whole facial structure? I still can't understand to this day why a professional astronomer should feel the need to wear steel-tipped toe caps. That if I ever am nowadays asked why it is that one of my cheekbones is less prominent than the other, I always say, just a storm in a teacup. But if I'm then pressed to elaborate in further detail, I go on to say, astronomer toe cap.
By your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the story, and we have an unusual result for the whole contest, which is a draw.
Taking part in My Word were Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore, and the programme was produced by Tony Shrine.